Hello and welcome to yet another edition of Prime Time Sunday. My name is Dennis John and we are broadcasting from Atlanta, Georgia. We want to welcome all our viewers from across the globe. Our topic today is the Liberia Transitional Justice and Universal Jurisdiction. My guest is Tennen Benedictus Dalieh. Tennen, welcome to Focus on Liberia.
Thank you very kindly, Mr. Ja, and thank you to everyone who stay up, especially the audience in Monrovia, those who are running late, and then just firstly on behalf of Focus on Liberia and the team, want to say our sincere apology for starting late. I mean, Mr. Ja will handle the rest of it, but I am honored to be here. Thank you.
We want to welcome all our viewers from across the globe. About 2 weeks ago, we treated transitional justice. So you can take this as part 2 or another angle in our discussion of transitional justice. And today, our emphasis is going to be on the role of extraterritorial prosecution in the Liberia transitional justice process. So as we go through, the keywords you will be looking at will be the Liberia transitional justice process. And part of that started already with the TRC. So a review of the TRC process. We're going to look at the process and we're going to look at outcomes. We're going to talk about impunity, justice, reconciliation, peace, and reconstruction. And our key interest will be the role of extraterritorial prosecution in Liberia's transitional justice process. Again, my guest is a PhD student at Dublin City University, researching transitional justice in Liberia. She obtained her master's with honors in international security and conflict studies. Our guest, again, is soon to be Dr. Tennen Benedictus Dalieh. Tennen, you're going to get it one day. It may delay, but you're going to get it, okay? So if I say soon to be, that can be a year or two, okay? Again, welcome to Focus on Liberia. We are glad to have you. How is it there in the UK?
So it's Dublin, Ireland. It's the Republic of Ireland, and not the Northern Ireland that is with the UK. But we're doing well, and like the rest of the world, we're still faced with situations linked to COVID-19. There's a lot going on. Hello.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is it okay now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot going on, but hopefully, the experts are estimating by somewhere September will be out of the woods, at least to the extent where we can have enough of physical interactions.
Thank you. Again, our topic, so transitional justice. So we begin the discussion tonight by first starting with transitional justice, the Liberia transitional justice process. Tennen, just take us through briefly what is transitional justice and what does that process look like in Liberia?
Okay, so I'll start first, and before I go any further, I'd like to make a disclaimer. I'm a PhD student from the Dublin City University. However, out of my statements, analysis, opinion, whatever it is tonight, does not link, is not associated with the Dublin City University or whatever group I am associated with. These are my opinions alone, and I am solely responsible for whatever is said on here tonight.
Thank you.
Yes, so we'll take the stage. Again, I'm a fast talker, so at any point if I am talking really fast, please, signal me so I can tune it down. I will try not to be extremely academical here tonight. So I'll start. So what is transitional justice? It would be considered as judicial or non-judicial measures, that are taken to redress legacies of human rights committed during the war years, violent civil conflict, or societies that are, faced with troubles. So within the context of Liberia, even before we had a violent civil conflict, we had different different accounts of human rights abuses, different accounts of atrocities, and eventually we had the 14 years of civil conflict. And this is where, now moving into, where we've had the act of TRC. So I beg you, please allow me to lay the basis for the conversation a little bit. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. So the act of the TRC gave a scope for what we had to do, what we had to investigate, and it says that between 1979 to 2003, all of the atrocities that had happened, all of the human rights abuses that had happened, had to be investigated with the overall objective, which is to promote national peace, security, unity, and reconciliation. That is not to say that atrocities did not happen in Liberia before that point. However, in order to give a scope of, or to give, a bound, to give a period, we can't just go into the rest of the 100 and say 50 years, 170 years, 160 years. That would be cumbersome, right? So there had to be a scope for the period to have, commissioners or those in charge to look into it. So what were some of the issues? What were some of the issues they had to look at? What were some of the concerns? Firstly, we had what we will call a violent civil conflict that began 1989, leading to 2003 when this comprehensive peace accord was signed, calling on the cessation of hostilities. Um, in between that period, we have had like 250,000 Liberians who were dead or who had died. Um, and then within that same period, which is 1989 up to 2003, we had one third of the Liberian population that were displaced, internally displaced. So these were some of these, like a scope of, what the TRC would look at, or the scope of it. And what is important to note, which I would get in a little bit from now. So before before we got to this point of, the TRC, before we got to the point of having, you know, an agreement, there were several other agreements which I do not, intend to go into tonight because it's not the focus of our work. So the TRC was the defining moment, the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, and then out of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement was, this process that would allow for, Liberians to give accounts of what had happened. Um, a critique of it is that it was a period, or it was as a result of what the rebel leaders there wanted. It was a reflection of what the 18 political parties wanted, and less of what the Liberian population wanted. But again, if you talk to people from different ends of, the negotiating table, they would say that was the best that we could have had. Um, so finally, we have the TRC ready to go. And later on, I'll go into the criticisms of it before into the bigger conversation. So just a highlight of the TRC process, or a highlight of, what was given in the final report. So by the end of the entire TRC process, and out statements taken, the different conversations going on, you the report, and I'm saying, which are there are several other things that are outlined in the report. I would just say upfront. However, for the purpose of this discussion, these are the highlights I'm bringing out, and there's a reason for it. I'm going to make the analysis, in the aftermath. So the TRC report had recommended a few things, right, and which are cardinal for this discussion. It had recommended that 124 persons or people plus 54 individuals should face criminal prosecution in two different courts of or jurisdiction. So you had one who had to face prosecution in um, national courts, and you had the other segment who had to face prosecution, or they were recommended to face prosecution in international tribunal. So that would be something similar to what we saw in Sierra Leone. That would be similar to what happened in Rwanda. They also recommended, for the 9 individuals, for lustration, or that they should be banned, from public offices, and that would, which became a controversial or controversial issue. President Sirleaf was listed, and key other senior government officials were listed in that category. Um, on a less contentious note, there were recommendations around memorialization. Um, there was also this point on, truth seeking and reconciliation, which was modeled, or centered around this Palava hut system. So within our traditional non-judicial settings, you have the Palava hut situation, where people go and have this communal discussion of what happened. Whoever it is, on the other hand, is remorseful, especially most of the time the perpetrator and the victim. The perpetrator has to be remorseful of what they have done, to the victim, and then the victim, after the bargaining back and forth, and then, peace and reconciliation can be, harnessed. Um, a bigger component of it was the repatriation. No, it's the reparation. I'm sorry, the reparation trust fund. So under that component, there was this, where they talked about economic reparation for communities, for individuals. However, with the criticism is that it did not name persons, as in, stating, oh, take for example, Tennen Dalieh as a main victim, and then, she has to be given X amount of money. A lot of that was considered in terms of Tennen Dalieh as part of a group, should be given reparation. Um, by the time all of this was ending, at least once the report was released, we saw how controversial and contentious it had been for several reasons. And then this is my argument, you know, at least by the time we knew it, by the time the TRC report had ended, um, the commissioners were fighting amongst themselves even before the process had started. So you speak to experts who have worked and they're still working in that field. They'll tell you about, the conflict with the setup of the commissioner's office, with the fighting between commissioners, the fight between Transitional Justice Working Group and the international experts that were brought in. There were not this cohesion, you know, at the top. So you had all these rigmarole between commissioners. And if you think of it critically, we had just come from a war, and you had the greater population or those who were involved in the conflict, seeking for a process they felt was less, punitive, and will really just allow for them to interact with their victims and not, interact with the judicial system. Now you needed a process whereby those who were leading had more moral grounds, those who were leading had less, ties to the political system, the political structure, But
When you say those who are leading, you mean the commissioners?
the commissioners, yes, the
Oh,
TRC commissioners, right? Um, at least now we know, right? I'm not going to call names because this is not my focus, and I'm not trying to critique what, the legacy of whatever they did. We appreciate, but then it's an open knowledge on how it ended, and that affected the process, that affected the outcome of whatever they were doing, that affected what would have been a model for post reconstruction, right, in the region. You know, the Sierra Leonean process comparatively was a little less contentious to handle because by the time they were finishing or rounding up, the leaders of the war were not in more political positions, so it was easy. Ours, we had our leaders very involved in the political structure and governance. So having people who would sit on those different processes or run, let's just leave it at the TRC role, with ties to the same political structure,
right.
was a negative for our process.
Yeah, but before you continue, I think the issue. Are you getting me clearly? Is my voice coming okay?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
Okay. So it started from based on what you said. It was merely the warlords that kind of influenced, or really that this is what they wanted because they didn't want to suffer any punitive measures, right? The whole outcome, I believe, was started on that. There was a false because it's warlords actually dictate the process that we may go through.
Yes, that is my argument.
Mm.
Um, my the people at the center of it, right? After power sharing, insisted that in terms of accountability, we will need something that is less punitive. You know, so then this TRC process, and then it was easy to allow because during the early 90s, truth and reconciliation was the okay, so I don't want to use a certain word, but then it was the go-to stuff, right? It was
Right.
the easy stuff. South Africa had their TRC process. Sierra Leone had something similar, So in Africa was this thing. Everyone was like, oh, Sierra Leone, South Africa process was okay, you know. But what it did was it took away from having the voices of Liberian present. The South African process was a decision from South Africans. They decided that we needed this model. We needed to talk. We needed to have this space where we can recount, where we can interact with our, perpetrators. This we feel is the important thing to do. But you also will understand with the way our crisis had gone and the different phases and the different failed negotiations, once you would have a process that would, allow for all of the rebel groups, to be in a particular space agreeing, that would, I mean, many years after now, we can make a criticism of it and say, it was good, it was not good. But if you were in that situation, what was paramount was, having a document that provided for a cessation of hostilities. Yeah.
Right. And I'm wondering now, based on what you've said, that what was the process of even selecting these commissioners? I mean, people that will be free of any influence or ties to either the warring faction or other political parties and groups.
Yeah, it was outlined. It was outlined at the comprehensive peace agreement in Accra, right? So the criteria was it had to be balanced. You had to be a representative of the Liberian community. You had to be perceived of being impartial, um, a diverse professional population. So like we had Jeremy Verdier. So there were different, and then this firstly is that names were sent by ordinary Liberians or some by the different parties involved, but then the decision had to be made, um, firstly by Judith Bryan, then who was the head of the Liberia National Transitional
Government.
Government, right? So he had to approve of them, and then initially there were different. I mean, I do not want to spend all of my time into the arguments around it, but it's the basis for where we are moving forward. Because like I outlined, right, whether they were selected, whether their selection was based on an influence or all of this, you know was it a missed opportunity? It's an argument anyone would make, on depending on what front you're from, you know. And I hold strongly that you know there was a missed opportunity, especially you know considering my background in development humanitarian work in advocacy. That was a missed opportunity. Um, once the TRC process became extremely political, extremely controversial, extremely, party based, members of the civil society group also did not move beyond the pettiness, beyond the political conversation. Somehow people got mixed in between it. Somehow people voices got lost. Somehow people, lost their positions. Some other people continued, but then the overall discourse then, really just took away whatever engagement was ongoing. Um, have they been engaged? Yes, there's been a lot of engagement, and for me, it's not the essence of my conversation. So I'm going to skip it into why I'm here. So can we just go there now? When the report was released, there were several things outlined, which again I'm mentioning, right? Um, so if you think of the criminal prosecution of Liberians, so the report had allowed for the fact that some people will be prosecuted within the Liberian jurisdiction, and then some people will be allowed to be prosecuted or should be prosecuted within an international tribunal. And there was a reason and a logic for that, right? You have by the time we're ending, our entire criminal justice system was broken. Our political system not strong enough to withhold the tension from warring factions or war groups. So to be able to have a criminal prosecution void of interventions, void of you know bullying, we needed an international tribunal to charge, try, these people. However, we've not been successful with any of it. Um, and there has been several reasons why, which I do not want to go to. So why I'm here tonight is, to make an argument for extraterritorial prosecution as, you know, an alternative mechanism, or in addition to the different mechanism or ongoing activities in Liberia that would really pressure the government or actors into, having the rest of the people prosecutor, criminal prosecutor, or um, the rest of the measures being taken or looked at or implemented. So we'll go there. Someone would ask, what is universal jurisdiction? What is it about? What is extraterritorial prosecution? What is it about? Um, Universal jurisdiction is a criminal jurisdiction based solely on the nature of the crime, regardless of where it was committed, regardless of the nationality of the alleged convicted perpetrator, regardless of the victim's nationality, or regardless of any connection, the country's connection to the state exercising such jurisdiction. And tonight, when to the audience, you want to look up universal jurisdiction and just for it. But then this is embedded within the Princeton principle of universal jurisdiction. So, what are the qualifications for the crimes to be prosecuted? Because already it says there are certain crimes that it's not just any crime. There are certain crimes, and then I'm going to outline those crimes and see how they match with these crimes that were mentioned in our TRC report. So you're getting the link now, right? Principle 2.1 makes a qualification of the Princeton principle of universal jurisdiction, makes a qualification, and it says serious crimes under international law, piracy, slavery, crimes against peace or terrorism, crimes against humanity, genocide, and torture. There's a distinction between crimes against humanity and war crimes. So war crimes are human rights abuses committed during war or civil conflict. And
Ms.
then,
Ms. Dalieh, before you get there, I want us to just pin down a little bit more this principle of universal jurisdiction. So there are cases that can be prosecuted in Liberia, and then you say universal jurisdiction, meaning outside Liberia, people have the right, or there are certain courts that have the right to prosecute people based on the kind of crimes that they have committed. Is that what universal jurisdiction is?
yes, so there are certain crimes under international human rights law that are grave, and it concerns every country, it concerns every nation, every state. So those crimes cannot be protected, and we'll come back under it. We'll come back to it under, the principle of sovereignty, or the principle of, self, like you're saying, oh, as a country, I have control over my territory. So I must be able to, my laws, I must be able to guide, I must be able to, those laws oversee national laws. Those, the crimes committed, they're big, they're grave, that they cannot be covered under international laws. And then it is the responsibility of international countries, or international states, or international organizations like the ICC, like the to be able to prosecute. So a country can claim, they do not even need the permission of your state to be able to prosecute, or to be able to even claim that case. They just need to state that, and make a case. So we're coming, little by little. They need to make a case, and a case that's, a bracket, there's an explanation or qualification of what that case would look like to allow for that prosecution.
So do you have to sign up to any treaty or be a member of any international organization for you to be part of, for you to be covered by this universal jurisdiction?
Yes, under the Rome Statute and under the Geneva Convention. In jurisdiction like the US, where a lot of these international instruments, they're not covered, they've been able to rework those international treaties, within their national laws to have it covered. So you'll see within, which we'll come to later to make an analysis of, the Chucky Taylor's case, right? So it started off what people claim, was an immigration issue. However, the torture which he was convicted of as covered under the United States government's law, which is also a part of, principle 2 of universal jurisdiction, you know, allows for that prosecution. And that was on the basis for which Chucky was tried uh, um, and convicted of. So, yes, once you're in Liberia, is a signatory to the Geneva Convention, the Rome Statute.
Okay, so let's go ahead now with the qualification of
Okay, so like I was explaining, right? Between what is war crimes and then what is crimes against humanity. So war crimes would be atrocities committed or during war, yes, but then in other states, for crimes against humanity, you don't have to be in a war, yes. So what we're seeing in, say, just in the region with Nigeria, you have all these different groups committing different hostilities and atrocities across. There's not a national conflict or civil brutal conflict or civil war, but the fact that you have a warring group there that um that having these children or raping, molesting, and all of it, right? That would qualify for crimes against humanity, and it can be tried under the principle of universal jurisdiction. Okay, so the there are two types of universal jurisdiction. So you have what is called pure universal jurisdiction, and that is where people can be prosecuted in absentia. So within this segment, your physical presence, does not necessarily have to be in that country. Your case file can be built, and then you can be prosecuted in absentia. And then there's, conditional universal jurisdiction. But then this one requires your physical presence to your physical presence in the territory to be prosecuted. Um, so what is the qualification? What is the qualification for case? So the qualification there says there has to be specific incidents where one or more crimes were committed by one or more identified suspects. So there has to be a suspect, there has to be an incident, and then there has to be the incidents have to be conducted. So there has to be proof that XYZ happened, or XYZ committed this crime to X, Y, and Z, and then it had happened between this period. This is how the crime looked like, say the beheading of certain tribes in Liberia, or say, raping of a targeted group, so those are the qualifications, and this is important because within the bigger picture of universal jurisdiction, it is not saying that local courts cannot prosecute certain crimes, right? And again, as stated in the TRC report, there are certain crimes that were allowed, right? So there are certain people who, yeah, might have committed some crimes that would qualify for murder under the Liberian jurisdiction or criminal system. The courts can look through and have that person prosecuted. But in instances, and I mean, again, apology, and for the purpose of this show, I'm going to be calling names, because it's very important. We cannot have a conversation around transitional justice, around reconciliation, and we'll be cowered into, trying to avoid calling names of people who have documented records of abuse in human rights in Liberia. So take, for instance, Prince Johnson as, a rebel leader. Prince Johnson cannot claim that the atrocities he committed during the war years should be heard in a national court. He cannot make that claim. And it is within this, it is allowed that it's either a tribunal investigate his activities, or a foreign jurisdiction can claim that the atrocities Prince Johnson committed are so huge that it cannot be ignored by, you know, the state. It cannot be ignored by the country. It cannot be ignored, and we must prosecute him. Build a case file and have him prosecuted.
In that case, someone has to go to that international jurisdiction to say, hey, here is Prince Johnson, or they take upon themselves.
It works in different ways. So this is where I say, we can build on whatever happened with the TRC report and moving forward. Um, we've got several groups that are working. So right after the conflict, we've had, donor groups come in, donor countries come in. And so take for instance, the situation with countries bringing in, their expertise. The Swedish government had for a long time moving, right, a collaboration between and a partnership between the Liberian National Police and their national police, right, on building institutional reform. Do we have groups that could engage the Swedish government to say our courts are weak and lack the capacity to handle cases concerning Prince Johnson, cases concerning, I mean, there's a lot of them, right? And we'll go into several of them. Do we? Can you people consider, thinking of this? We have different diplomatic measures to take, but these groups can build a case. Again, as I mentioned, can build a case, right? So this case is, these are the voices, these are the incidents, they're documented, they're available, the witnesses are here to talk, they'll be protected, but can you, right? Depending on whatever the arrangement is, right? And then you have a partnership between their jurisdiction and our jurisdiction. So, like right now, there's a whole conversation or discourse back home about this Gabriel massacre, and it is something for us to consider within the broader within the broader picture of Liberia's ongoing transitional justice process. So, how significant is Gabriel, you know, and how significant is he and the atrocities he committed in Liberia? Um, a lot of people may not be aware. Gabriel was one of the lead witnesses against the child stealers case, and then he was given amnesty after different arrangements. But then again, because of universal jurisdiction, right? It says even though he was given amnesty to and taken to Finland, whatever he did cannot be covered by by that amnesty. It's grave enough that it has to be heard. And the Finnish court looked into the legalities of it, looked into the merits of the argument, and it was legal. So now here we are. Other than that, Gabriel would have continued with his life as a free person, because he had he had given his statement and it was enough to convict another criminal, and then his is ignored, right? So this is the opportunity. There are counter arguments, and the counter argument is that it takes away the voices of those, right? So it's like the court is happening in a different jurisdiction, in a different territory, a lot of the times far away from the state where the crime had happened. The counter argument to that is, what is the end goal? The end goal is to have people account for their actions in a court of competent jurisdiction. Is that okay? Yes. You know, would that, bring closure for family who had to live through the horrors, who had to live through the pains of what had happened? I would argue, yes, it does. Does it serve? Would it serve as a deterrent? Yes, it would. We have a culture of impunity in Liberia, and that is into the bigger picture, right? People tell you, oh, let bygone be bygone. Oh, let's forget it. The troubling issue here is, we have a society, that basically, with less recent memory of what has happened, right? So the 2008 census says over 65% of the population were less than 35. Now you do the calculation, those group of people, 65, many of them were still, like children, many of them not enough to make sense of the atrocities that were going on. The rest of them basically have no memory of what had happened. Now you are telling that generation who lived through the atrocities that, oh, yes, let's leave it. And then, you it's happened, right? And then there's this conversation with collective guilt, right? So Prince Johnson beats his chest and he says that, oh, I did it in defense of my tribesmen. I did it in defense of the people, So whatever I did, whoever got affected, you know, it is legitimate. We can all move on and have a greater Liberia. Is that a society we want? No, there has to be, we have to move past this culture of impunity. People will have to account. And if that means having, other jurisdiction look into these matters, it should not be an issue.
Right. So you talk about the TRC and the work that they have done, and now we are linking that to universal jurisdiction. Take for example, Prince Johnson or Josh Bowley or Ahadi Kurma, and I can call names because I know them. I lived through the war, so I remember them. What would
I
be
was
the
coming to the rest of them.
yeah? What would be the process of this universal jurisdiction? Are you saying that the Finnish code, for instance, or any group outside Liberia can just come and pick them up, or we as Liberians can go and complain? What would the process be like?
So it's not picking them up. The first is the first thing that has to be done, and that is the onus on all of us, is
Right.
to take away this negative sentiment that has successfully, clouded everything. People say, oh, by the time criminal prosecution, we're going to return to the war years. That is a lie. That is a lie. And again, that is a lie. We're never returning to the war years. It's never going to happen. Criminal prosecution is never going to take us to the war years. The negative sentiment has been empowered by the voices of these rebel leaders who we've given power to, who we've given our airways to, who we've given our state to, our governance to. So they have the position and they can manipulate it in their favor. It's about creating, this positive sentiments for people to understand, to know, to have a deeper insight, to believe, trust building. That was one of the negatives around, the TRC process. People have to be very secure that, okay, so I'll step back a little, right? You want to firstly, like I said, take away this negative sentiment and redirect it or redo it into a positive sentiment. For those who are very interested in working in this, you have to do what we call, a power analysis of the current political structure, which is neo-patrimonial. And I'll explain that a little bit before we go further. So So neo-patrimonialism is, a political structure, economic structure that surrounds, a certain group of people in power in governance, and those people in power, they're linked to the economic centers of different, So take for instance, you have okay, I'm trying not to call, the leader of the state, but take for instance, you have George Bole. You know, George Bole is a former warlord or a warlord. I really would not want to call him former warlord. And then you think of him as, or he represents a certain group of people. That is the power dynamics. Are there certain, he's connected to several people. Those people are connected to several things. As George Bole, he may be connected to someone who is the head of an institution. That person who is the head of the institution is connected to another person who is in a power of influence, right? In order you are doing that power analysis within a patrimonial setting to see how you can get these people out of their power base. To do that, you're also, recording, and you're also cataloging, and building a case file. So once you have that case file, you're able to determine and say, George Bole, this is the account of him, his involvement, the people who were victims of him. Now, these are the people who he's connected to, who gives him this much power. So how do we want to get him off this power, right? All of it is embedded in again, I'm saying, the power analysis through a neo-patrimonial lens. That way, if you can engage different jurisdictions, right? Like we saw, what his name, Tom Woweyu with the U.S. government. There are several governments that are interested in what is going on in Liberia, and then we have to express that interest. So negotiations can go on, and they can take different forms. Liberia is extremely dependent on development fund. Would it come at a cost? If we're serious people, yes, it should come at that cost, right? So that cost would be those foreign governments engaging our government and saying, we're very concerned about the hostilities that happen in Liberia, And then if as a government, you do not wish to look into it, we really do wish to look into it. And if you do not, these are the, so you might not get your direct budgetary support, or we will not support this different program. But even in the midst of it, right, with that case file, then it moves to a different pressure. So we saw what happened with the child stealers case. The final result is extradition. You will be extradited. That is the final result. Do we ever want to consider any of that? I believe strongly yes. Because as a government, we make an argument, or the government makes an argument and say, we do not have the funding to prosecute these people. We do not have, the capacity, legal capacity, or whatever capacity they do not have to prosecute these people. Can you extradite these people? If it is what you can do, extradite them to those foreign jurisdictions to have them prosecuted. Does it bring a sense of stability to the country? Yes, it does. Is it reassuring? Yes, it does. And if you look into it, right, as the government has been arguing, the investment, there's no investment attraction to the country and all of that. People are definitely not going to invest in a country that is very unstable, politically, with human rights concerns. No one is going to do that. Will this be a point to attract investors, right? To say they're making efforts, and we certainly, can provide different support in different ways. Yes, it would bring that sort of attraction.
All right. So who really should be doing this? Okay, we have groups that are calling on war crimes court, war and economic crimes court. There are groups in Liberia. There are other groups that are calling on the government, say, institute war crimes code or facilitate the implementation of the TRC process. Are all these people going about this thing the wrong way or the right way?
Everyone is right. The TRC, or not TRC, I'm sorry, the Transitional Justice as it is not a homogeneous process, right? It's not like a single and then everyone can go in a single way or can address. There are several things to do, and everyone can do, a bit of it, a bit of it. There are certain people who, you know, take for instance, there's a colleague, a senior colleague, Aaron Weir. He's been doing a lot of work. He's done a lot of work, and he's now into academia. Hopefully, he will get back, will join the advocacy. There's another colleague, Adama Dempster. He's also involved. There's another colleague, Danieta. I'm just calling a few of them. There are a lot of people. Everything they're doing, they're all legitimate. They're all leading to national reconciliation. They're all leading to peace and stability. The point for this is that we are having hard time with the political structure. Um, 4 years ago, when this government was still in opposition, they were big on, having having the war crimes court established.
Right.
The political dynamics have changed. You're very aware. Why it's changed remains, something for all of us to know what happened behind the scene. You know, do
Mm.
we despise, whatever interventions the rest of the people have been doing? I would argue otherwise. The bigger picture is, do we want the culture of impunity to persist? No, absolutely not. Do we want the people who've committed atrocities to be in governance and have voices? Absolutely not. Like, recently, what you're seeing around is this, image building. So you have, again, I'm sorry, but I find it a little offensive. Prince Johnson is a notorious criminal. He's a notorious person, right?
Right.
And then he has a church where he uses, as a platform to preach about forgiveness, right? And then he says, oh, God says we should forgive. Oh, and then the government allows for him to construct a school using, our resources. And then it is endorsed by the president by visiting the school. What message are you sending, right? That we can kill people and then 20 years after we build schools and hospitals for them and it is gone. We have Yeka Kwaluba. I'm not sure if he understands the depth of what he does. Or I fought in the Liberian war, but I was recruited as a child soldier. Okay, true, but it's not, it's not inexcusable. Like, it's not. We can't turn our eyes on it. You knew what you did. You have to account for what you did before a court of competent jurisdiction. We saw what happened between George Bole and Honorable Sewell Dixon, right? And he afterwards had a press conference and said, "Oh, I had no role. Oh, whatever I did." There's a recent account with the land issue in Nimba County, and the national government should be very, very. But now I would have been, monitoring, and I would have thought the national government would have issued some statements, and move in the background to work on it. There's this guy on live broadcast, and he is very vocal. He says we have combatants who are ready to go back to war, who are ready to, inflict citizens. If you people cannot address this, we will go back. We will, we'll like. I'm not trying to even rebroadcast that, but this is the society we have. That basically have said, when you are confronted with a particular issue, do not go through the courts. Inflict wounds on people, abuse them, their human rights, abuse their humanity, and then we can all get back and say, oh, let bygone
The
be
background
bygone.
is
I'm not
background.
sure we want that for our society. So every single mechanism, every single intervention that is going on in Liberia is very legitimate. However, we will not, allow for a conversation that says, we can talk about this, but then we cannot also talk about criminal accountability. No criminal accountability, because again, right, you're always innocent until proven guilty. That's within our judicial system. So as much as we're very aware of the atrocities these different people committed, we cannot make a claim on them until the court does that. And this is
Right.
why we're calling for, foreign courts, to be able to pressure and have these people account before the law.
Right. And let me get this one thing clear now, bringing our viewers for the with their comments. Akaros Gray was Representative Akaros Gray was on this platform, and we asking about this question of the implementation of the War Crimes Court. First, he said, well, the people that were doing it, it was not CDC as a party. There were elements within the CDC that were calling for war crime. In such a way, he tried to maybe minimize that it was just element of the CDC. But what the argument has been is security. Well, during 12 years ago was the perfect time because we had union mail, we had security, but now we don't have security. Next thing is we don't have the money, the resources it's going to take to set up a war crime court. You are saying all this is irrelevant if we can kind of outsource this process, if we can send these people to an international court. Please be clear on that.
So this is why this conversation is legitimate, and this is why we need many voices. We need, to stop giving. Yeah, we need to hear more from people who are working in this field. Like I mentioned, a few colleagues just recently. It is unfortunate when back in the day, and it's not so far away, when Akaros Moses Gray, Honorable Akaros Moses Gray spoke, he spoke representing the Congress for Democratic Change, and there are records for that. I'm not going to go there with him. I'm going to leave it there in an honorable way. Um, the next part of it that is very important. What is peace and what is stability? Who measures peace? Who measures stability? I earlier on mentioned that, we've given a lot of credence to the voices of our abusers that is created negative sentiments.
Yeah.
And that's just all. People are breathing on the fear. Again, I mean, it was just recently, Alhaji GV Kroman. There was a whole ceremony, and it's no disrespect to him as a person, but there was a whole ceremony. And if you see in the background of the picture they had there, our leader,
Yeah.
So these people hold a certain position. These people, they've had a certain. Do we want to ignore that these people also led a rebellion in Liberia? Absolutely not. Do we know how to get these people out of that power base? We certainly do know. And that's why I mentioned we just need the technocrats to do the work. We need the advocates to have their voices amplified. The victims are ready to express whatever, to have it cataloged, to have it, spoken in court, because they do need justice. It is not going to disrupt the peace.
Right.
Within the 12 years that was spoken about, there were institutional reform ongoing. There's a whole, you could bring someone else, an expert on the judicial reform that had gone on through the 12 years. There are issues concerning magistrates, training, building of new courts, building of new infrastructure. Are we where we want to be? I would answer no. Are we far away from where we came from during the war? Yes, absolutely. Are we ready? Yes, we are. There's never going to be a right time,
Perfect.
especially
Yeah.
when we have our abusers in governance. We are talking about there's no money. That's funny. There's no money, but we're giving money to empower our abusers. They're in the governance structure. We've made some of them senior advisors to the president. What kind of money are you looking for? Does it supersede the fact that you have a whole population that needs to, that needs redress. They have to be told something. They have to hear, they have to speak with their perpetrators, right? So let's walk away a little from criminal prosecution. The TRC report had, argued that, or recommended that, uh, there should be this whole stuff around memorialization, which, again, my colleague Aaron Weir can really speak into. So monuments should be built. There has to be a recognition. As a country, we've not even done any of that.
Right.
And then, because the politics around it, they've asked that we should rewrite our history. I know the learned Professor Elwood Dunn was leading on that. I'm not sure what the status is. Have we done any of that? Are we feeding into this stuff of, oh, can we just, yeah, can we just,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, we cannot be an apologist. No. So the assertions by Representative Gray, they're wrong.
Right.
The government needs money to prosecute criminals. The government can mobilize with her partners. The government can, as a government, right, make it a development agenda, or make it not even consider it an agenda exclusively, right? The same way the government says we need to build roads, deliberate about building roads, the government can equally be deliberate about, we need to prosecute, we need to have people account for their roles in the war years. And if you consider it, if you look at it from that dimension, right, money can be from wherever it is to have it move towards that direction.
I agree, and I like what you said when we allowed the war mongers or visas to dictate the narrative. Like in the case of George Bulley, who LPC, Liberia Peace Council, is responsible for the death of my father. I know he's going to say he had no role, but let me go to our comments here. This one is from IB Yang. He said, thanks for the brilliant presentation, TD. I want to get something clear on the principle of universal jurisdiction. It is not part of any international law or treaty, but it is a right countries are claiming to prosecute certain crimes beyond their borders. This means they must enact national laws that give the courts and prosecution prosecutorial power, maybe. I know many countries have not established universal jurisdiction authority in their courts. Do our courts have to enact certain laws to say, okay, we're going to institute universal jurisdiction? Maybe that's how I'm understanding the question.
No. So Liberia have signed onto the Rome Statute, and Liberia have signed onto the Geneva Convention. So a little background. It's a popular case. Firstly, before then, there were huge concerns around piracy. So this is the beginning of this. This is the beginning of the principle of universal jurisdiction, right? There were concerns around piracy, and then since piracy was happening in the deep waters, and then there were not, delineations of between what country owns, what country does not own here, right? Countries had to make that self-determination into we can prosecute pirates, from this we can prosecute. But eventually, as international laws started developing, then it became like a conversation around, how do we handle terrorism in an instance where it does not fall, where legal courts of a state cannot prosecute or does not have the capacity to prosecute. What becomes, then it becomes the burden of the international community, So one cannot make a claim, and Ibrahim, one cannot make a claim and say, oh, it has to be domesticated by, your court as universal jurisdiction before it is allowed for. Absolutely not. So countries, countries, even take for instance, there was a popular case. Um, there was a popular case within the Senegalese jurisdiction, right? And then he the Senegalese government had argued that they had jurisdiction over what was happening. It became a contentious issue with the regional politics, but then over self-determination, over the principle of sovereignty and all of that, over the principle of complementarity. But again, the point is that it is embedded within international law, the Rome Statute, and it covers under the Geneva Convention. So that, like, there cannot be a duplication of laws.
Mm.
Yes, there cannot be a duplication of laws.
And
So
there can
that's
be
why
ratification too about that.
Sorry.
You said duplication of law. So there should also be ratification.
Okay, so like I said, in their different jurisdiction, within the U.S. jurisdiction, they do not sign on to international instruments, but they can take, as it concerns a specific part of it and have it localized or nationalized, right? Within our jurisdiction, we sign onto different protocols and we make it, a national. So in this instance, we've signed onto the Rome Statute and we've signed onto the Geneva Convention. We makes it legitimate, which makes, us a signatory. But even in the instance where we were not a signatory to the Rome Statute or the Geneva Convention, another state that have signed onto the Rome Statute and the Geneva Convention can claim legitimacy to say it does not matter the fact that Liberia hasn't signed onto the Rome Statute or Liberia hasn't signed onto the Geneva Convention. Whatever atrocities that happen in Liberia are grave enough that we, as an international community, cannot ignore, and we're assuming that authority to prosecute.
Okay. Let me get
the issue there around, which I mentioned, the issue there around the issue, there's a huge conversation, and I'm not trying to go, legalistic. There's a whole issue around complementarity, the principle of complementarity. And it really is, it centers around cases being admissible before certain jurisdiction. So, take for instance, like at the UK, British jurisdiction would hear cases, can assume, which happened in the Agnes Taylor's case, but then their jurisdiction is styled in a way that it does not give voices. So the court is structured where you do not have victims come and give testimonies and give their accounts, right? Witnesses. No, a case file is built and it's based on our case file. Whoever the perpetrator is charged and tried. Unfortunately, because there was not enough information, contained in the case file, the case was dropped against Agnes Taylor. But then, like we see on the other hand, Chucky Taylor, we see with Tom Woweyu, unfortunately, he had died before his entire process had ended. Keisha is still ongoing. Gabriel Massaquer, those different jurisdictions allow for witnesses to make statements before their jurisdiction to be heard. So you have, what would happen in terms of diplomacy is that the state where you have the perpetrator has to be aware that another state where the crime is supposed to be investigated is interested. And then this is where the conversation would come in. How do we have access to the perpetrator as well as the witnesses? Because there are different layers of it with the witnesses, right? As much as I want to give my story, I want to be protected. With the perpetrator, he also or she also has to be protected. The law, international human rights law, provide for that. They have to be protected. bar of different intimidations and all of it. So what support can this state, the state that have these people, what support can they provide? But in
Right.
instances where the state becomes adamant, so again, I'm saying we want to, another state wants to prosecute Yeke Koluba, right? And our state become adamant and say we can't, we
We take
can't, we
it over.
can't. Then you have international at the senior level where an extradition will be like the final. This person has
Yeah.
to leave. We can't, like we're not negotiating. The American government would say we're not negotiating with terrorists. It would be that kind of scenario.
Let me read more comments here of Fasia Harris, or Fasia, but Harris. The stories, experiences of the war are horrible, and yes, we must not allow the memories to fade away without any form of accountability. A.B. Kale, it is not possible no group of tribal members will ever bring war to Liberia. Kuyate Kabina say, you are making some sound points here, Tennen. And then when I talk about my father, Nelson will say, what your father was doing at that time. I don't know if he wants to suggest that maybe my father was fighting, but the bigger question here is around this same thing of people protecting their own little warlords or their own little devils, right? In that case, and that's why, as you mentioned earlier, someone like Prince Johnson would say, I was doing this for Nimba County. And so if you touch me, you touch the whole of Nimba County. Someone like Nelson Wulu, who's probably from George Bullitt ethnic group, I would suppose, is saying, maybe your father was fighting, that's why he was killed. How do we deal with this kind of, what do I say? This tendency, this mindset of protecting our own little devils?
Okay, it begins firstly with having a conversation. It begins with having an honest conversation. We have to talk about it. We have to allow for people to give their accounts, bar of repression, bar of fear of being intimidated. Um, like I said, a lot of what we hear are air quotes from our abusers, and then the group they represent definitely, would validate whatever they did. Liberia has gone through a lot, So people talk about Lamco was Lamco, right? The historians will talk about that. But unfortunately, there were serious accounts of abuse, right? And then we got to this point where it became, oh, them versus us, where people had to make their actions legitimate. And now the civil conflict, so people would make an argument for whatever happened. Moving forward, we have to, regardless of what side you were on, there has to be this, like in okay, so I'll use the Rwandan, model. It is not that it's without criticisms, but yes, the Rwandan and the South African model. People told their stories. People made an account of what happened at different levels. We must allow for it. The next thing is, how do we as citizens, right, start holding people seriously accountable? Um, Again, you just mentioned a certain group of people would want to protect their side, but what about some of us, or those of us who have no sides at all? Because one thing I said earlier was this collective guilt. People say, oh, all of us participated in a war. No, I did not participate in a
Right.
war. My mom did not participate in a war. My dad did not participate in, neither did my grandparents participate in the war. So no, none of us, I mean, I would say we're not. We have to be able to speak of it right up front. Last year I participated in a national dialogue held by Mr. Matthews and his group, on the pathway. So reconciliation, what were the different options? It was like discussing what were the different options to look out for. Um, Lensdale Matthews, his group, and then there was this stuff, right? How do we promote reconciliation, right? Do you make the burden of forgiveness on the victim? You know, you say, oh, you know, they were happy and not happy. You were just your one would just be moving around and making it seem to look like to see like your one mind and part that move on now. And it makes it sorry. It definitely must not be the burden of the victims. Perpetrators have to be remorseful. You know, the situation at the TRC, President Johnson Sirleaf, unfortunately, goes to the TRC and says that she gave MPFL 10,000. They were not a humanitarian group, madam. I'm sorry. They were active participants, a rebel group. And you gave them 10,000 to do what? To feed the Liberian people? Till today, she not apologized. She denies that she ever said that they should, run down Monrovia and it would be built. Now, we can't have any reconciliation in the midst of that. Prince Johnson is the same. Can we, as citizens, call these people out at national forums, at national meetings, at different points and say, look, we firstly have to acknowledge what had happened in the past. I mentioned earlier on about rewriting our history, right? About that entire project. Can we have a solid account of what happened? Like an agreed account, a national agreed account. All of us, saying as Liberians, we agree. This is, man, there's nothing that's without criticism, but a national history that represents all of us, right? And then this, I mean, I'm sorry, but it's a little emotional right now. Like,
No, Tennen, you are right, and I too got emotional because it was 1993. My father was killed by George Boley and LPC. My entire town of Dublin burned down. My aunt was killed. The principal in the local school who taught me ABC, Maurice Tucker, was also killed by LPC rebels headed by George Boley. And here is this guy who's supposed to be a tribesman of George Boley asking me what my 70-year-old father was, or 60 to 70-year-old father was doing at that time. And you brought back about Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. One reason I did not support Sirleaf and never supported her is that statement, which she had never accounted or recanted. All the other warrior faction, and then the one that was so painful for someone to look at me, a victim who lost my father, and tell me all of us are responsible for the war. Okay, and let bygones be bygones, because if you pull rope will pull bush. Today I want to bring you back so we can continue, if possible, with some of your colleagues, so you can continue this. We can continue this conversation. Go ahead and land your point.
I'm sorry, you keep me a little distorted.
Yeah, no, I say go ahead and finish your thought. I just got emotional when this person is asking what my father was doing at that time, for which he got killed by.
Exactly, right. We have to be deliberate, right? So earlier on, I had stated the TRC report had provided for a reparation fund, right, for victims. Um, the the downside of it is that it did not name individuals, but rather as communities. Um, and it's unfortunate because there are several people who are still living with the physical wounds of what happened during the 14 years of civil conflict. Bullet wounds, stray wounds, all of it. People hands chopped, people several things. The state there has to be a national program that addresses that, right? And we cannot push it and say, oh, no, when we build roads, then it automatically will cover up for it. There are communities that were wiped down, right? And there has to be there has to be a way that or an intervention that speaks directly to what happened, that situation. How I mean, moving forward, you know, we have this what now seem like what is the legacy of the war, right? We have youth who are somehow adults who are hooked on drug, right? So we see that, you know, and people be asking, oh, but you wanted to the for war. Um, yeah, no. Some of them were raised in homes by parents who fought in the war, who the state, you know, basically did not intervene. So they were raised seeing their parents hooked on drug, and then they, you know,
Yeah.
lived in that condition. Others lived in a community basically, right, with those sort of experiences. And so we have to, and this is what all of us as, you know, ordinary Liberians, and these things I would say really does not involve having a lot of money, or that does not involve, it's like a national driven initiative at different points, right? All of us we could do, we have to, I mean, we do not need a money in the bucket just
Yeah.
hanging down here, and then it's like, okay, go and use it and have different interventions to address the different concerns. That has never happened. That will never
That will
happen.
not happen.
It has to be led, or it must be led, I'm sorry, it must be led by communities, by individuals who are very interested in accountability. And I really do commend the rest of, you know, Liberians back home who, regardless, you know, that there's never a process that is void of criticisms, but in the midst of the different concerns, you know, people people are still pushing and insisting that, you know, there has to be criminal accountability, there has to be some form of accountability.
True.
I am really big on criminal accountability because we have a culture that basically just, you know, reinforces, you know, this stuff on, oh, let bygone be bygone. When you have a conversation, people like, oh, we want restorative justice. And I'm like, okay, you
Yeah.
know, can you explain whatever that is? But then if you move it layer by layer, you realize that these are the voices of perpetrators who are basically, you know, trying to step away from 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 having an interaction with their victims, you know, and then they're opting for a process because restorative justice, you know, the emphasis is placed on perpetrators rehabilitation.
Mm.
Like, okay, these are perpetrators, and which is not a bad idea, right? Like, these
Right.
are perpetrators, they've done, and then the society needs to address whatever issues they have in their lives. You know, some people raised during the war, yeah, some people like Yeka will, Honorable Yeka Kolba will boast up and say he was a child soldier and they brought him to fight, so he fought,
Mm.
right? Disregarding what his own actions were,
Exactly.
right?
Because there were
Instead,
other kids.
what about criminal accountability under, you know, like retributive justice? The emphasis is placed on victims, and it's not to say that, you know, we perpetrators, perpetrators are not considered. You know, we've been having this ongoing conversation with prison reform. It is under, you know, retributive justice, because when you face the law and the law finds you guilty, you're going to jail. In jail, you know, the prison system has to be enough to, you know, bring you to this place where you're
Yes.
remorseful for your actions.
Yeah.
But we cannot continually place emphasis on perpetrators and ignore the fact that we have a society of, you know, a lot of victims, or a society, you know, with a culture of impunity.
Thank you. We have 3 minutes left. Let me read the comments again from Ibrahim Yang. Say, what the warring factions leader did was to politicize the tribes by breaking the tribes into the war and making the case that they were fighting a tribal war. The next stage was to tribalize the warring factions by giving it a tribal outlook. The tribes now provide protective shield for their perpetrators. Fasia is agreeing with you here, IB. He said exactly the point, shielding their crimes under tribal covering. Liberians would not buy into it. Elizabeth is saying amen to that. Also, Patrick Johnson say perhaps he knows, the guy who was asking about my father, say perhaps he knows or has information on the poor man. Only takes heart, brother Ja. Thank you, Patrick. Galakwa is watching from Lofa. He says, thank you very much for the program. You are making a lot of sense tonight, my sister. That's why I'm saying agriculture is the way to go in building our nation. Thank you so much, Tennen, for this. Again, I said we want to invite you back to continue this conversation because it is very, very much needed in building our country. Because if we don't have justice, I believe nothing is going to go straight. Okay, Wolof to his defense, the reason I ask is we all have people killed in Liberia, but if we start pointing fingers, then there will be no peace. So, saying
It's
this,
a collective guilt. It's we shouldn't go into it.
yeah. It's so
We shouldn't
I just want to
amplify it.
make, yeah. So, Tennen, thank you so much for. I want us to do this again, even with
I
some
do
of
not
our,
mind. It's gonna help. It's gonna help my. It's gonna help my study. Cause again, like, I do not come here as an expert in the field. I come, as a student and academic, right? There are a lot of components around this. Um, but before we go, let me just respond to what Ibrahim Yen has said. So that the learned scholar Paul Collier, right, in his grief versus grievance theory, really argued that with wars or acts of wars, there has to be a justification for conflict, right? So some people say it's resource war, some people say it's grievance, and beneath grievance, that's where you have this tribal sentiments or tribal stuff coming on. So how do we undo that tribal sentiment? This is a conversation we need to have, all of us, right? All of us, because at this point, and then with tribal, it's like political identity, and then we hold true to those identities and we feed on them. So how do we have a conversation around that, so to the point that it leads to national reconciliation, and it also takes away this support that it gives to our abusers, our perpetrators. But I mean, I look forward to coming back, and I really want to say thank you for providing this platform.
thank you. Any other final statement you want to give before we end the broadcast? But before you give that statement, let me make some announcement here as to what you're going to be seeing during the week. On on Wednesday, we're going to have Mr. Kimon Jokali, who's going to be talking about his bid to be president of the United Bond County Association in the Americas. We're going to have him here. Then on Thursday, we're going to have our Tough Talking Thursday, from whence cometh our help. Most of the time we say, who's going to save us, or who's responsible for the way things are going? Is it the government? Is it the opposition, or the people? In other words, in order to fix things, what would be some of the places that we need to touch? Thursday, for Tough Talking Thursday, that's our topic. Then on Saturday, the Honorable Mambu Riches will be here along with other sports veteran Benedict Wisse and Charles Wadsworth to discuss the development of sports in Liberia. And many, many more programs will be coming up right here on Focus on Liberia, where we educate, we elevate, and promote all things Liberia. All right. Thank you again, Tennen. Your final comment, and then we can close the broadcast.
So tonight, I want to say to Liberians back home. I want to say to Liberians in the diaspora, um, justice definitely will not be denied. It, hopefully, it should be in our lifetime. And yeah, like people would say, justice delayed, not denied. And some would say, if not in our lifetime, some other time. No, I am optimistic that we'll have justice in our lifetime. And this is a reassurance. We're never returning to the war. All of what's happening, there's scare tactics. no one has the capacity at any level, right, to destabilize the peace. We've gone through a lot, we've seen a lot, we've lived through a lot, and it has to be our burden to secure the peace. We cannot return to the war years. Thank you very much again, Mr. Ja. Thanks to everyone for listening.
Thank you so much for your time. We want to thank all our viewers from across the globe for watching, and even those who are going to watch later on YouTube and other social media platforms. Thank you also for your comments. Continue to support us, continue to tune in, continue to subscribe to our YouTube channel, continue to do whatever it takes so that this platform will continue. And we never end our broadcast without playing the song that says we are all Liberians. Whether you support the War Crimes Court or not, whether you support retributive justice or restorative justice, no matter which side you're on, we are all Liberians, and we must do whatever it takes to make our country that glorious land of liberty. Good night and God bless.
We are Liberians. Liberia is our home.